First day out on the new bench, and I think I told you last time I had made an error and cut the beams too short, too thin. So I made up a new batch, and I'm now going through them and finding some imperfections. So what I do is I mark out the high spots and use this curve sander, hand sander, just to take out the high spots before I put them on the gym barns to cut them. It's almost impossible, certainly more difficult, to shape these or correct them when the individual beams have been cut. So the time to do it is when you've made the blank. In case you're wondering, this is the template that I had cut the pieces from. One of the challenges I've had is keeping track of my notes as I went along. And this is typical of my build. I'd have a piece of paper and write down whatever the challenge is at a particular point in time. And then of course everything gets mixed up. Then I reference back the book and I can't find the place. So the solution to that, and I thought of this years ago and never did anything about it, is I've started a log, and the log really is my build log as I go through. So even though I have a video log, I also have a written log that allows me to go through and check measurements and decisions and thoughts I had. So it's easy for me to reference. And again, just in the column on the side, I would have whatever the key point was that I was working on. In this case, I'm working on the upper beams, so the heading would be marked upper beams, and then, as I say, just record what I've done. I have actually ended up making 30 beams, which is more than enough, but it just suits the blanks that I'd cut out. One of the techniques I developed to deal with the convex surface was to put a pencil on the top surface of the piece and sand it away until it went. And this would get rid of all the dips and the highs and the lows and smooth it out. So when I went to the concave surface, it would be perfectly smooth. Now we're going to put deck clamp number 21 in, so we need to go back to the plan and take the measurements off. And to do this, we have re-established our thinking, because I've forgotten what all these frame numbers are, and re-establish all the frame numbers on the frame plan that I got from the National Maritime Museum. And then I'm going to take the measurements off the Mylar plan. We've identified a number of frames that we're going to measure. We don't need to measure every single one, because what we're going to do is establish the key points and then put a very thin flexible batten along these lines, and then draw the line that establishes the top of the strake that the upper beams sit on. So the beams that we are measuring the height are right at the bow, frame 4, 7, 10, L4, C4, the center line, 1 aft, 4 aft, 6 aft, 9 aft, 11 aft, 13, 10, and finally 6, which again is very important. That is where the wing transom, the end of the wing transom. And just to remind you, what we're doing, what we're measuring is the top of the upper deck beam, from which we have to deduct 6 inches to get the line that would establish the top of the upper clamp. You should remember the height gauge we made up. So we'll use that to transfer the measurements. And what we do is we have a cardstock on a vertical board, and then we can come on the height gauge and set the height gauge very accurately to meet that mark, and then simply go on to the model in this case it's frame number 6, and put a mark on the frame, and then flip it around, being careful not to touch it, and do the same thing on the other side. Microlux makes an excellent sander, which you've seen me use many times. And one of the accessories that it has is this very flexible pad that allows you to do curved work. When I was putting on the lower deck, you may be able to see it here, I should have done a much better job in fairing the frames on the inside. And you only see that when you actually come to put, in this case, the waterway in. It really was not the best job. And so to make sure that I do a better job, I'm putting a button back inside and really cleaning up to make sure that when the button goes on, I have a nice flat surface. So here, for instance, is a little bump, and we can put this Microlux on. We can also reduce the speed of it, so it's really taking off very little, and just make sure that when we are putting the strake on, that it's going to be fitting nice and flush. Now we take a nice piece of bendy stock and line up all of the marks. And so we'll run this along so we get a nice clean line, and you'll find as I come to the front of the boat, I have to use a more flexible button. And the old specialty clamps that I built becoming very useful here. So I don't have a lot of these pieces. And now I've established the line all the way through. And that is the bottom of the deck beam, and it'll mean that the deck beam will sit on top of this strake, but we'll have to recess it down 1 inch. And we'll do that all the way to the back, and then of course to the other side, and establish that in a strake, strake number 21. Sometimes I get very confused which of the frames I marked out, so I put these little red tags all over the model, and I know immediately that that is the frame that I'm trying to put a mark on. The temporary button is simply to give you a nice clean line for which to line up the final strake. Once we put the strake in place, we take back out the blow dryer and heat gun and bend it into place, and that normally holds it quite well. This is a scarf joint because the strake was a bit longer than the pieces I had cut out. Again, simple, skill, easy to learn, stuck with epoxy in this case. Now we have to reduce the top of the stemson. It needs to be 1 inch below strake 21. So again, just taking a measurement of the plan and putting that final trim in. Continuing my history on showing you all my errors. I'm not sure how I did this, probably because I didn't fit the wing transom properly, or in trying to put it in, it slipped. But the long and short of it is it's 2 inches too low at the end. The port side is fine, it's just the starboard side. And to make matters worse, for some reason, I'll have to go back and see, I put epoxy instead of PVA. So the only way I could take this out is to break it out and then try and sand it clean. It's just much easier for me to put a filler strip on top, which is what I'm going to do, and bring this back to the temporary height, or to the height of this temporary end beam. Of course, I'm not going to make the same mistake and use epoxy. I'll use PVA this time, and that means that if I want to take this piece out, it really is very simple to do that. To put in strake 21, we've put in these blocks, little wooden blocks all along, which help us line it up. Means we don't have to go down and look at the line. That's all been established. Simply clip them in place. Now all I have to do is put the glue on and clamp it up. I put PVA glue on both the frame and on the strake itself, so I get good adhesion. Where there's a lot of twist, it's important that we flatten the top of the strake so we get a nice flat surface. You'll find this in the bow and in the stern. The rest of the strake is relatively flat against the frames. Once it's in, you'll see that I pick back up the height gauge and double check everything randomly, check both sides one against the other, and certainly check to make sure there are no errors. The best way to find a solution to a problem is really to define the problem. And so I couldn't understand how I had made an error on the stern, because if I misunderstand something in the book, that's fine. But something as basic as putting a measurement down, I had a lot of trouble with that. And I was reviewing this film and suddenly realized, particularly you notice it when I speed up the film, that the model was moving. And in fact, there were two issues. The first issue was these little pieces here. The clamps that I used to hold the front and the stern, I wasn't 100% sure of the space that I should have used here. And so I made these adjustable sliders and thought I was really so smart. But what happened is, if I put pressure on one side of the model, it actually pushed the slider away, and then I started to get movement in here. So that was the first problem. I've since glued those in place, so that's not moving at all. The second problem was this little bugger, and what happened is some termites got into this. Everything else in this thing is treated, but termites got into the bottom of this and started eating away. And this afternoon, after I fixed the problem, I came to the back, and then I found that the back was moving too, and that was a real nice tight fit. Couldn't understand it. And there were the telltale signs of holes in the bottom, and when I took it off, they had actually eaten into the laminate. So I've restuck it and treated it, and so there's no more, that's solid as a rock now. Now I don't feel so bad. I kept feeling that I was the guilty fool that had made the error, particularly on the stern. I knew the two ends had to be even. I just couldn't figure out how I could be so stupid. But anyway, I'm not. It's a good news. And I suppose that's a good sign for us to bring this to an end, and we'll start planking. I'm going to do just the stern first, simply because I've had some challenges that I need to fix, and then I'll come to the bow and move back as we did with the lower deck frame. So see you in the next video.